Hello, everyone. This is Rosemary Coates in Silicon Valley. I'm your host for this edition of the Frictionless Supply Chain podcast. I'm the executive director of the Reshoring Institute, where we help companies bring back or expand their manufacturing in the US. And I'm a contributing writer to Supply Chain Management Review. Today, I'm very excited to welcome my old friend, Beth Hayes. She's an independent consultant in the healthcare and life sciences industry. Beth consults to biopharma companies, helping them to modernize their businesses and deploy AI solutions. We're going to be talking today about the very unique world of pharmaceutical supply chains. So let's get started. Welcome, Beth.
Thank you, Rosemary. It's excited to be reconnected with you and the work that you're doing.
Well, we love hearing about successful women who work in and around supply chains, and pharma has some really different kind of characteristics that we want to learn about today. But we'll get to that in a minute. First, can you tell us a little bit about your background and how you got started in consulting in life sciences?
Sure. My career started off with traditional consulting with KPMG, and then Rosemary, as you know, you and I met with a startup venture back many years ago and had the opportunity to work across industry. One of our outgoing board members was the incoming CIO of Wyeth and subsequently Pfizer, and I had the pleasure of joining him and his leadership team to drive innovation for a number of years and fall desperately in love with the pharmaceutical industry and all the complexities and idiosyncrasies that it possesses. I wouldn't say that I'm an expert in supply chain. I am passionate about it because I think it touches everything. And so, through my consulting work over a number of years, as well as being in industry, I feel like 9 out of 10 projects, engagements that I've had the pleasure and the benefit of contributing to have had some facet of supply chain as a part of um, its core process. And I think in
Yeah.
that regard, I think it's a really exciting place to learn the industry and have an impact because of how varied and significant it is.
Yeah, for sure. Those of us who work in supply chain like to say it's the foundation of everything,
Yes.
really. Yeah, if you're working in a company that produces a product, supply chain is the heart and soul of that product, right? So, yeah, it touches everything. I'm glad you've been exposed to it and have been working in that area for a while. So tell us about life sciences supply chains in general and how they differ from other industries, because there's a lot of uniqueness in this particular kind of supply chain that you don't find in other industries.
That's exactly right, Rosemary. I think the primary difference that I believe is fundamental is there's zero room for error in the nature of these products. Unlike CPG, biopharma disruption can be life-threatening, and it requires, in some cases, in some specialty product areas, needle to needle traceability and temperature controls from beginning to end. I think one of the other things that is quite different about biopharma and the supply chain is the rigid regulatory framework that contributes to complexities and time-consuming activities for organizations. Any change to the manufacturing process or a supplier, as an example, would require months of revalidation, unlike a more agile supply chain in automotive or retail sectors.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I've worked on a few projects in the biopharma sector, and yeah, I mean, it's really difficult for supply chain people to deal with that because we're used to changing suppliers or finding alternate routes or, tweaking product here or there, re-engineering a product. And all of that has to be approved in a regulatory environment. So it makes it very cumbersome. And I think also the decisions become somewhat more structured and more careful. So it isn't like you're testing anything. I mean, you can't just try out a lot of different things in biopharma. You have to be very specific and controlled, and yeah, makes it really complicated.
That's exactly right.
I think the other thing that's quite interesting is the pharma supply chain is really a combination of a lot of different kinds of supply chains. So when you think about it, if you're considering medical products, for example, a pharmaceutical product, not only is the sourcing different, but the on the other end, the delivery is different. And in the middle, you've got all these regulatory environments. So can you describe some of the differences and such as procurement of specialty ingredients and all of the complexity that goes into the front end first, and then we can talk about the back end.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm the expert in the sourcing of raw materials or API manufacturing, but I will, provide some general perspectives on this and use an example of one of the advanced therapy areas that I think contribute to some of the your comments about the multiple supply chains and the complexities. Certainly, the biopharma products, the supply chains will vary significantly by product type. I think historically, where you had products that were predominantly pill in nature and packaged in a pill form, the manufacturing went to distributors, then to retail pharmacies, then out to the doctors in some cases, and or to the patient directly. But what continues to evolve, which I think is really exciting both for patients as well as pharmaceutical manufacturing and delivery, is the scientific innovation continues to advance and reach new heights every day. I've had the pleasure of working over a number of years at the intersection of tech and cell and gene therapy. And this is where complex biological products and high personalization become a significant concern from a supply chain perspective amongst, other disciplines. You can imagine this to be a batch of one. And, in an example of the end-to-end supply chain, in the case of some cell and gene therapies, it starts at an academic research center or an advanced healthcare organization where patients' blood or cellular material is collected. It's then shipped to a specialty manufacturer where those cells then are genetically modified with other pharmaceutical ingredients and activators. And then it's shipped back to the healthcare organization or the research center where these personalized therapies are then infused back directly into that single patient. These therapies can, in some cases, exceed $3 million for a single treatment. But
Wow.
they do, in many cases, have the promise of a cure of the disease that's being treated. I think that the complexities of this type of product and the delivery supply chain, as you referred to, are quite significant and probably pretty obvious. But just to, highlight a few, there's the chain of custody and tracking that is required when you're dealing with patients' cellular and blood materials. There's specialized logistics and packaging for temperature control that are also in play for a lot of these therapies. You can oftentimes these therapies are not first line treatment, so the patients are already really sick or compromised. And so the speed and the timing, not only for the preservation of the product, but for the success and the, when the survivability of the patient is absolutely critical. the cost of goods, as well as the finished product, is very high, as mentioned, in the $3 million treatment price, as an example. And all of this requires a high fidelity tracking and just-in-time decision making throughout that process. So lots of handoffs, lots of stakeholders, lots of independent systems and siloed data that create a perfect storm and opportunity for supply chain to really
Wow.
mature and deliver value for patients and the healthcare system overall.
Yeah, wow. The complexity is really breathtaking,
Yes,
especially for these individual treatments. I mean, you can imagine, most supply chain people are dealing with bulk ideas, bulk shipments, bulk, movement of goods and tracing big lots and so forth. But when you have to trace each individual lot,
right.
with the chain of custody requirement for every single item in that shipment, wow, it's almost overwhelming. It's incredible. So I
It
would
is.
imagine there's got to be some systems that are involved to help with the software to be able to help trace these kind of things.
Yeah, yeah. It's probably, I don't know, maybe at least 7 or 8 years ago, while I was at Salesforce, I was working with a lot of the pioneers in cell and gene therapy. And that was an example where existing tech was being configured and in some cases customized in order to facilitate this end-to-end process and visibility and tracking. There's been other advances in the technology, SAP and a number of others also have capabilities or in combination with other, tech that ultimately make this possible. But again, I think it's not, a simplification or a modernizing the tech within a single stakeholder, but it's how all of those stakeholders interact and their systems interact and share data that ultimately is where success or failure is achieved.
That's the holy grail in
Right.
supply chain, is to be able to keep track of everything that's moving through the supply chain. Yeah, really, really tough.
Yeah.
On the other side of the coin, with when you've got bulk production, so I know a lot of the building block kind of materials that go into things like Tylenol, or some of the common off-the-shelf drugs. Those building blocks, those basic things, are chemicals that are actually manufactured overseas. And, during the Biden administration, I know they identified the top four critical industries for U.S. supply chains in order to sustain the health and well-being of Americans. And those were, let's see, semiconductors, EV batteries, rare earth elements, and pharmaceuticals. And then the funding from the CHIPS and Science Act went to redeveloping those basic industries in the US, because what we figured out during the pandemic was that we were very dependent on China and India. Do you see that also? Are you seeing dependencies in certain areas of the world that affect how raw materials are sourced, and the approach in shipping things worldwide?
Yeah, it's an excellent point, Rosemary. I think there's still, a significant dependence on China and India for biopharma supply, and this continues to be a high stakes transition and vulnerability that I think the United States is pursuing actively. There's a couple of statistics that I had researched before our call that might be helpful. If we talk about generic drugs, for example, the dependence on China and India is north of 90% for all US prescriptions. And what this is often referred to, kind of the choke point, is a double dependency, because India provides nearly 50% of all those finished generic products, but China is the backup. So if China wanted to squeeze the US, they can do it through that Indian relationship for sure. Active ingredients, APIs, that you had mentioned earlier, 80% of that global volume is also dependent on China and India manufacturers. And this is where China dominates with global production of things such as antibiotics and penicillin and others.
Yeah, I mean, just think about that. If we're dependent on a country where we're in the middle of a horrendous trade war,
Yep.
and they decide to use the supply of pharmaceuticals like that, and they decide to pinch that off. And the same is true with semiconductors and with rare earth elements.
Right.
We are so vulnerable. It's just, I mean, what would we do if we couldn't get Tylenol, or we couldn't get, some common diabetes drugs or
Yeah.
that sort of thing? I mean, it's really kind of a scary situation when you think about that particular supply chain and how vulnerable we are.
That's exactly right. It kind of gives you knots in your stomach, right? But you know what? This is where the American spirit figures, we figure it out, right? Like when push comes to shove, we figure it out. And I think, what's that expression? Um, something about not letting a good crisis go to waste, right? Like this has created a wake up call, I think, for our industry, and biopharma broadly, which I think is really exciting. So even though the numbers aren't great, it is this awareness and acknowledgement that's creating this new high stakes transition to a better sovereign supply chain for our healthcare, that I think is going to pay dividends for decades to come.
So in that regard, is manufacturing actually coming back, pharmaceutical manufacturing coming back to the US?
Yes, it's so exciting. So, yeah, I think a lot of this has been, started with the Chips and Science Act, as I think you referred to. That was a grant-based um, um, legislation that helped provide funding to the chips manufacturers and some of these other industries that you referred to. What's different now, which I think is super exciting, is this combination of that with the Biosecure Act, new tariffs, um, uh, most favored nation, and just this general awareness overall, how much it is driving private investment of the onshoring initiatives that are taking place. This isn't coming out of our taxpayers' coffers. It is being funded by the world's largest biopharma companies. And I think the number that my trusty assistant, ChatGPT, came up with was 370 billion over the last 4 to 5 years, right?
That's how
And
much has been reinvested in the US.
that's how much has been committed. So,
Commit.
and of that, probably in the last year, if you just look at press releases alone, it's north of 200 billion. It's
Wow.
really exciting and real movement. I mean, I've got a few data points on this too. There's Merck announced, they're breaking ground on a $3 billion center of excellence in Virginia. That was October. Let's see, there's significant investment from like Roche Genentech in multi-site expansion in Holly Springs, North Carolina. There's a $4.5 billion Virginia investment by AZ. So all of these companies, in some cases by stick versus carrot, are doing the right thing and bringing manufacturing back, here to the United States, and driving, better localization and availability of drugs to consumers and to patients.
Yeah, I mean, just consider if we didn't make penicillin, antibiotics here, if we were fully dependent on a global supply chain, which we have been in the past,
Yeah.
how vulnerable we would be if there was, some another pandemic or something like that that required antibiotics. It would be crazy.
Exactly. I will tell you, Rosemary, and I'm not an expert here either. It's worth your listeners maybe digging into this. Antibiotics and the investment there is a whole nother topic because of the cost effectiveness of manufacturing it, versus the critical nature of it. And the antibiotic resistance that we all build up over
Yeah,
time. There's a whole discussion in that alone.
yeah, I'm sure. I'm sure. So it's just reminded me of how critical it was during the pandemic when we first introduced uh, the shots so that we could,
Yes.
yeah, the antivirus shots, and the breathtaking response in getting those delivered. I mean, just think, the virus, the drugs were developed for the virus.
Yeah.
They were manufactured. They were kept in cold storage and so forth. Then the U.S. government arranged for all of that to be shipped throughout the United States to millions of sites
Right.
where they were being delivered to patients. There were doctors and nurses involved, and they organized all this stuff. I mean, it's just breathtaking how fast and how efficient the distribution of those cures, I guess I would say, the vaccines, were distributed throughout the United States, and how many millions of people got shots like within a couple of weeks. I mean, it's just amazing. I
It was
remember,
amazing.
yeah, I remember the first vaccine that I got. I had to set an appointment, and I walked in, and they took some information, and they handed me a little card, and then took me in. I got the vaccine, and they stamped the card. I was out of there in like 15 minutes. I mean, it was just jaw-dropping how efficient it was. And,
Yeah.
I wish all of our supply chains were like that, but not so
That's
much.
exactly right. I'll tell you one little fun fact, and I reference it often. I know I have lots of friends in the industry, of course, and I remember someone sharing from Pfizer how they 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 internally even they highlighted how valuable it is to focus. Like when an organization of that size and scale focuses on a single objective, what's possible, right? And that was an example of it. So
Yeah, yeah,
sometimes you've just like the harder thing to do is to declare the priorities,
yeah,
right? And I think
right, right.
that's what's so hard about, whether it's business leaders or government leaders or state leaders, right? It's the prioritization that, leaves some people disappointed, some people waiting. But if you can get highly focused, you can get stuff done.
Yeah, yeah. Really kind of amazing, amazing examples that we can all hope we can apply in multiple situations.
That's
I
exactly
just
right.
I just want to take a little turn here and talk a little bit about your experience with AI in pharma. Certainly the topic of the day, and I know AI is being introduced in all kinds of supply chain situations. But can you talk a little bit about how it's being used in pharma?
Yeah, so I would say one of the biggest things as it relates to reshoring is this recognition by the manufacturers and the contract manufacturers that modernization, the digital modernization, digital first manufacturing is going to be table stakes for reshoring so that we can get parity with other lower cost labor markets, right? And that doesn't mean that you're going to have less humans necessarily, but maybe the humans are going to be doing different things, and you're going to have the benefit of better digital flow, transparency, data analytics, and insights that I think will, fundamentally change the way things, are manufactured today. I think from a traditional perspective, automation, including maybe more traditional forms of AI, historically, were reactive. If you were lucky, you would, through that automation, you would identify a problem, oftentimes after the fact, but you would make swift and immediate action to resolve the issues. And again, the promise with new modern agentic AI is that it's more coordinated, it's proactive, and I can see where this is going to have a significant impact on different therapy types
Mhm.
of therapies in particular, just like the cell and gene area that I mentioned earlier. But I mean, just a few examples, you can utilize AI to reroute a shipment automatically and then do the update to the production schedule. There might be opportunities for the agentic AI capabilities to do some automated or autonomous reasoning, and with the trade-offs that are ultimately always present between cost, speed, patient need, and so forth. I think scanning through a multi-tier ecosystem and looking for early risks and signals so that action can be taken proactively or investigated is another area. And maybe the ultimate goal would be some sort of healing, self-correcting supply chain operations or network that that does the things that oftentimes takes
Yeah.
lots of time and trial and error to resolve.
Yeah, yeah, I think pharma is pretty far ahead in the use of these kind of technical products, software,
Mm.
AI, robotics, ahead of a lot of other industries just out of necessity. And yeah, and so we can all, I think, learn from some of those situations for sure.
That's exactly right. I'll give you a one interesting example of innovation that I've been really impressed with over the last year. I had the opportunity to facilitate a webinar with a couple of leading biopharma manufacturers, and Sanofi was one of those that highlighted a partnership that they had with Formula One and the McLaren race team. And so what they were able to do is they took their manufacturing and operations personnel and they had them join and participate in Formula One um, racing and the research and analysis where they were able to observe the impact and value of sensors, high-speed cameras, and other things that they were utilizing from an AI perspective to bring better flow and efficiency and impact to their race and to their overall performance. And so what Sanofi was able to do was to bring that back into the manufacturing scenario to drive some significant opportunities as well. So I think, even as the technology is changing, I think it's an opportunity for organizations to continue to partner and partner differently, maybe in some cases, to drive innovation and insights that they wouldn't have been aware of otherwise.
That's a great example of how we can learn from one another in different parts of the supply chain in different industries, how we can take best practices from one place to another, how we can introduce new ideas, all of that. So that's a great example. So just to wrap up, what advice do you have for supply chain professionals, especially women? This podcast is focused on helping women achieve leadership in supply chain. And so, what advice do you have for women as they're coming up through their career?
You know what? I think, everything about the industry, about supply chain and the industry, and I refer to that broadly, much to your point earlier, Rosemary. The customer supply chain from beginning to end is really it's an exciting time for reinvention, for insightfulness, for just driving new ways that will ultimately create less friction, less dependency on intermediaries, and or nations that we prefer not to be dependent upon, that will drive, ultimately a better patient experience. And a better patient experience results in better outcomes inevitably for patients in the healthcare system overall. And so I think in that regard, I think there are a lot of academic programs that are specializing in supply chain now that didn't exist before. I think there's lots of opportunities to dig in and learn and be a student of the opportunities and ways in which, as a professional, whether you're in the quality and compliance space or whether you're in R&D and clinical supply or whether you're on the manufacturing and the procurement and the distribution side, there's so many places to be involved and have an impact, a significant career impact. I think the biggest thing for me is when you think about supply chain, at least back in the day, you think about trucks and trailers and shipping and things like that, and it's so much more. I mean, that stuff is really interesting too, I find. But there's so much more. I think it's strategic, it's process centric, it's data centric. It can be highly focused on the customer and customer outcomes. And I think there's a lot of really exciting reform and challenging of old ways of working and operating and governing that I think is going to have a huge difference. So I think this is the year of the patient and the patient supply chain. And I would just say, if you have any, interests or want, if there's any interest in me in connecting you with, your listeners to others in the industry, I'm happy to do that. But lots of
Can you,
sources out there for sure to tap into.
along those lines, can you give us or give some information to the listeners on how they connect with you or how they learn more about your work?
Yeah, on LinkedIn, of course, is the best way, and I think it's Beth Hayes. Simply, I'd say that read, like it's fantastic, like what senior leaders and business pioneers are doing right now. I'm really excited about the work that Mark Cuban is doing with Cost Plus and disrupting all of the middlemen and some of the things that have been a chronic cost drag and impact on patient product access and affordability. I think there's some really exciting things in the direct to patient and direct to consumer area, where you can bypass the insurance company altogether and get cost-effective products delivered directly to your door. That's super exciting. I've been a benefactor of that myself, so that trend is really exciting. There's a great book that I enjoyed reading, called, I think I'm getting this right, The American Health System, What's Broken, How We Fix It. And it's kind of an expose of, how it works and where you can, lean in and play a role in reimagining a better health system and supply chain for the future.
Terrific. Thank you so much. It was so interesting to talk to you, Beth. I really appreciate the time you took today. And you can listen to more Frictionless Supply Chain podcasts posted on Supply Chain Management Review's landing page, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And you can reach me, Rosemary Coates, rcoates at reshoringinstitute.org, and visit our website, www.reshoringinstitute.org, where we publish all of our research on manufacturing in America. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Rosemary.